What would you do if you saw the most vicious horse in the region, the one that broke every trap, suddenly freeze in front of a girl, as if it recognized her? That night in the canyon, something strange happened. No one in the area could explain why the stallion named Thunder returned to the same gorge every year on the same night, from August 14th to the 15th. The locals whispered that it was the spirit of a hanged horse thief. Veterinarians blamed rabies from a bat bite, and old blacksmith Mackenzie, who had shod more than 1,000 horses in his lifetime, simply crossed himself inside out with his fur coat and locked his door with 3 bolts as soon as the wind carried a hoarse exhale from the canyon. But Thunder was not rabid, and he was certainly not a spirit. He was alive, flesh and bone, weighing nearly 1,000 pounds, with hooves that could knock a bull off its feet with a single strike. And he hated people with such pure, calculated, almost sacred fury that seasoned cowboys, men who had faced grizzlies and enraged mustangs, refused the $5,000 reward without even attempting to throw a lasso. 3 had tried. The first was Chase Barton, a rodeo champion in the under 80-kilogram category. He lasted 4 seconds in the saddle. Thunder threw him so hard that Chase landed on his back and never walked without a cane again. The second was Liam Reed, known for taming wild horses with his voice, without ropes. He approached Thunder with open palms and spoke in that guttural language taught to him by the elders of the Crow tribe. Thunder listened for a minute, then simply stepped on his foot. The bone cracked like a dry branch. Liam didn't scream. He lost consciousness from the pain. The third never returned at all. They found him 3 days later, 4 miles from the gorge, with broken ribs and hoof marks across his back. He was alive, but he never spoke about horses again. In fact, he hardly spoke at all. Sheriff Rawlings ordered the animal to be shot, but no one could get close enough to take the shot. Thunder could smell metal from half a mile away. He heard the click of a bolt before the shooter even managed to inhale. And every time men came for him with rifles, he retreated deep into the canyon, where the walls closed in so tightly that no rider could pass, and no man could survive without water. This went on for 3 years, and then she arrived in town. Her name was Tyra. No one knew where she came from. No one knew how old she was. She looked either 16 or 25. She didn't wear a cowboy hat, didn't snap a rope, didn't order whiskey at the saloon. She rode in on an old limping mare with one eye. The mare was nearly 30, her back bald from saddles, her teeth worn down to the gums. The locals laughed. Someone even offered to buy the mare for meat, but Tyra simply looked at him, just for a second. And he fell silent, because there was no anger in her gaze. There was a kind of emptiness more terrifying than any threat. On her very first day, Tyra headed straight for Thunder's Gorge. The sheriff tried to stop her, put a hand on her shoulder, said something about responsibility and corpses. Tyra shrugged his hand off without even turning around. The farmers gathered by the watering hole watched her with laughter. "Go on, girl, he'll have you for breakfast," shouted a fat man in a grease-stained jacket. But the laughter quickly died, because Tyra was not walking toward the gorge like a victim. She walked like an owner returning home after a long absence. She crouched in the middle of the dried-up riverbed, right on the scorching stones, and began to wait. Without water, without shade, without weapons. She simply folded her hands on her knees and closed her eyes. The sun melted the sky into the earth. The temperature rose to 42 degrees, Even the lizards hid in the cracks, and Tyra sat motionless. An hour passed, 2, 3. The sheriff was already about to send a search party when Thunder stepped out from the shadow of the cliff. He appeared without a sound, black like a crack in the world. His mane was matted into tangles, his sides hollow from hunger, yet his muscles rolled beneath his skin like steel cables. His eyes burned not yellow like those of ordinary horses, but with a deep, swampy, almost human fire. He stopped 10 steps away from Tyra and snorted so sharply that small stones tumbled down from the cliff. Tyra did not move. She did not open her eyes. She even slowed her breathing, so much that from the outside it might have seemed as if she were dead. Thunder took a step, then another. His nostrils flared, drawing in her scent. He waited for fear, that sweet, sour smell a person gives off when their heart drops into their heels. But there was nothing. Tyra smelled like dry grass, like old ash, like something that cannot be frightened because it has already seen the worst. And then Thunder stopped, not out of respect, out of confusion. He tilted his head, trying to solve the riddle, and at that moment, Tyra opened her eyes. She did not look into his eyes. Only fools do that, inviting a strike. She looked beneath him, at his right forehoof, just a second of a glance. But she saw everything. The hoof was deformed, not by nature, not by rocks. It had been shattered by a bullet, an old, rusted, large-caliber bullet that had entered the pastern, split the bone, and remained there, rotting and causing pain with every step. 3 years. For 3 years, Thunder had been stepping on that leg. For 3 years, bone had been grinding against metal. 3 years of hellish pain that had turned a colt into a demon. Tyra slowly rose. She did not make a single sudden movement. She simply took from the pocket of her faded flannel shirt a handful of dried wormwood. The stems were brittle, gray, smelling of bitterness and dust. Tyra placed the wormwood on a flat stone between herself and Thunder. Then she turned and walked away. She did not look back, not even when she heard Thunder snort behind her, not threateningly, but almost questioningly. She walked back to her wagon, and none of those watching could understand what had just happened. The sheriff asked, "Are you crazy? He could have killed you." Tyra replied without turning around, "He only kills those who come with a rope. I came with wormwood." She did not explain what that meant, but old blacksmith Mackenzie, who stood by his shed watching through binoculars, suddenly began to cry, because he remembered. In these parts, wormwood had once been laid out to mark paths for wounded horses. It was a sign, a language people had forgotten, but animals still remembered. The next morning, Thunder stood by her corral. He did not attack, he did not run, he did not paw at the ground. He simply stood there, shifting his weight from his injured leg to the healthy one, and looked at her one-eyed mare. The old, half-blind horse did not even flick an ear. She lay on her side, warming her aching joints in the morning sun, chewing tough grass with complete indifference to the presence of the monster. Tyra stepped out of the wagon with a bucket of water. She set it down on the ground exactly halfway between herself and Thunder. Then she walked 20 paces back, sat on an overturned trough, and began peeling potatoes. Calmly, as if the stallion were not a black killer, but a neighbor's dog. Thunder stared at the bucket for a full hour. Then he took a step, stopped, another step. He drank in small sips, not lowering his head too much so he could keep Tyra in the corner of his eye. She did not move. She did not even look in his direction. She simply peeled potatoes and whistled something low and drawn out, like a lullaby. By the end of the week, Thunder allowed her to clean the wound on his leg. The first time she approached him with a cloth and warm water, he stepped back and lashed out with his hind legs, kicking up a cloud of dust. She did not stop. She stood there for another 5 minutes, holding the cloth in her lowered hand until he calmed down. The second time, he allowed her to touch the pastern. The third time, she touched the wound itself. When her fingers found the bullet entry point, Thunder shuddered all over, and Tyra felt the muscles beneath his skin ripple violently. But he did not strike. He did not bite. He simply closed his eyes. Tyra worked without forceps, without tweezers, without the kind of disinfectant that burns like acid. She used warm water, honey, and spider webs, an old forgotten method once used by native people to draw out infection and stop bleeding. Every morning she came to him with a bucket. Every morning he stood in the same place, like a sentinel. The bullet was lodged deep, and Tyra understood. Without surgery, it would not come out. But who would operate on a wild stallion that had already crippled or killed those who tried? The story would not have ended well if Wade Barrow had not arrived one evening. Wade owned the Dead Loop Ranch, 5,000 acres of scorched land where horses were bred not for beauty, but for slaughter. He was heavy-set, red-faced, with ringed fingers and the smell of cheap whiskey. 3 years earlier, it was he who had shot Thunder when he was still a colt. Thunder had refused to be broken. He threw Wade's best handler and shattered his collarbone. Wade didn't bother to sort it out. He simply took a rifle and fired from the porch, aiming not for the head. He didn't want to ruin the meat, but for the leg, so the colt would bleed out and die in the canyon. But Thunder did not die. He survived, and he came back. Wade learned about him from his men. They told him some girl had tamed the devil, and that the stallion was now worth 50,000, maybe 100, on the black market where horses were sold for illegal betting and underground fights. Wade arrived with 6 hired men, 2 trucks, and a document signed by a local judge, signed in exchange for a bottle of whiskey. The paper stated that the stallion was property of the Dead Loop Ranch and was to be seized. They came at sunset. 3 pickups with cages in the back. Wade stepped out first, adjusted the belt with his holster, and smirked, a gold tooth flashing in the light. His men climbed out behind him, grim, silent, carrying ropes and syringes filled with tranquilizer. Tyra stood by her wagon. She was cleaning the hooves of the old mare and did not even raise her head when the trucks stopped. Wade approached her, unfolded the paper, and jabbed a finger at the signature. "Girl, this isn't yours. It's mine. You either step aside or I'll feed you to the dogs." Tyra lifted her head. There was no fear in her eyes, no hatred. It was the same look she had 3 days ago in the canyon when she faced Thunder. The calm of someone who had already answered the most important questions for herself. "He's not yours," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady. "You wounded him, but you didn't take him. That means he belongs only to himself." Wade laughed, loud but hollow, like a coin dropped into an empty barrel. He waved his hand to his men. They began to spread out, forming a half circle around Thunder. The stallion stood 100 meters from the wagon, near the dried riverbed, watching. His ears were forward, his nostrils flared. But he did not run. And then Tyra did something no one expected. She stepped not aside, but forward, straight between Wade and Thunder. "This is the last time I'm telling you," she said. "Leave." Wade stopped laughing. He didn't pull out the paper this time. He drew a gun. An old .45 revolver with a worn grip. He fired into the air. Once, twice. Thunder flinched but did not bolt. He looked at Tyra as if asking permission. Tyra shook her head, a single small movement, and then Thunder went still. What happened next? Witnesses would recount years later with trembling voices. Horses began to emerge from the canyon. First one, then 3, then 10. They came silently. No neighing, no thunder of hooves. They simply stepped out of the shadows of the rocks like ghosts and took their place behind Thunder. One by one, each of them bore scars. Each had marks from bullets, ropes, or knives. One had a torn ear hanging like cloth. Another bore a burn along its side, once branded with hot iron. A third, a dapple gray, had a missing eye, the result of a blow. A fourth, a bay, had deep scars on its pasterns. It had torn at its bindings until the bone cracked. These were the horses Wade had discarded, the ones he sold to slaughter, the ones he starved when they didn't meet weight, the ones he left to die in canyons when they broke their legs. They were alive. They remembered, and they had come. 15 horses stood behind Thunder. Not a herd, a pack. Their eyes burned with the same swampy fire as their leader. They did not move, but every muscle in their bodies was drawn tight like a bowstring. One movement, and they would surge forward, not to flee, to attack. Wade stepped back. So did his men. One of the hired hands dropped his rope, another dropped his syringe. The tranquilizer shattered on a rock, and a sharp chemical smell spread across the dry ground. You're with them," Wade whispered, staring at Tyra. For the first time in a long while, something like fear appeared in his eyes. Not fear of death, fear of something older, something like justice that knows no expiration. Tyra did not answer. She simply stood with her arms folded, looking at him. There was no triumph in her gaze, only weariness, as if she had seen men like Wade 1,000 times, and 1,000 times understood that they do not change. They leave only when they realize they've lost, and they never return because coming back would mean facing that loss. Wade climbed into the truck. His men followed. Engines roared, and the 3 pickups sped off toward the highway, leaving behind a cloud of red dust. A minute later, the dust settled, and it grew quiet. So quiet that Tyra could hear the heartbeat of the old, one-eyed mare. Thunder stepped forward. He came up to Tyra and nudged her shoulder with his nose. Not hard, like a foal nuzzling its mother. Tyra raised her hand and ran it along his mane. Her fingers found old scars, from flies, from barbed wire, from blows. She said nothing. She simply stood there. And the stallion stood. And the other horses stood. And in that silence, there was more meaning than in any words. The next day, Tyra left. She packed up her wagon, loaded the old mare into the trailer, and disappeared as suddenly as she had arrived. Thunder was not with her, nor were the other horses. The canyon stood empty. Even the hoof prints were gone, as if the wind had erased them. Sheriff Rawlings filed a report that read, "The stallion known as Thunder has left the county. Current whereabouts unknown." Old blacksmith Mackenzie watched the canyon through his binoculars for a long time, then put them away in a drawer and said to his wife, "They went somewhere no one will find them, and that's how it should be." But sometimes, deep at night, when the moon hangs low and the shadows of the cliffs stretch across the ground like fingers, the shepherds hear hoofbeats, not loud, not fast, measured, heavy, as if a herd is moving somewhere very far away. And if you listen closely, you can make out one sound that stands apart from the rest. A limping, uneven strike, the injured leg, the bullet inside the hoof, and following it, a quiet, almost inaudible whistle, a lullaby, sung by someone who knows that even the wildest beasts are not born cruel. They are made that way, and only the one who is willing to heal instead of break, to listen instead of command, to place a handful of wormwood on a stone and walk away without looking back. Only such a person can hear what silence is truly saying. No one ever saw thunder again. But every year, on the night from August 14th to the 15th, a solitary fire appears in that canyon. No one knows who lights it. No one knows why. But the old people say, if you have truly lost something important, go there. Sit on the stones, place a handful of wormwood, and wait. Maybe someone will come, black, limping, with eyes like embers, or maybe only silence will come. But in that silence, you will hear the answer. And that answer will not come from books. It will come from blood, from the earth, from that ancient memory that still remembers what it feels like to be free, when no one is trying to throw a rope around you. Thank you for watching and spending this time with us. If this story touched your heart, please support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story.